everybody. Welcome to a lecture on selective attention. I'm really glad you've decided to join us for this particular discussion. William James, who is a foundational leader in psychology, has this quote, which I think does such a nice job of explaining attention. So my experience is what I agree to attend to. Attention is so important and critical for everything that we do. And as echoed in this quote, our experience of the world is whatever it is that we choose to pay attention to, or whatever it is that grasps our attention. So what exactly is attention? We use terms like concentration, attention, focus, all to kind of describe this cognitive process that leads to a focused behavior where we're monitoring or attending to something. William James described it a little bit like a spotlight, where we have all of this information in our environment, and attention is like a spotlight and hones in on particular pieces of the environment that we want to focus on. As you probably know, attention is not constant. It changes from moment to moment. In fact, I would imagine that at some point through all of these lectures, your attention might get more fixed on something. Your mind might wander. This is going to depend on whether you've had enough sleep, if you're hungry, if there's noise in the background, how much time you have. All of these things can affect our attention, and our attention changes moment to moment. Selective attention is specifically focused on the idea of focus and inhibition. So it's the ability to focus on relevant stimuli and to ignore the irrelevant. So it's not just enough to focus on something, but you have to tune out other information that's not relevant. We need selective attention because we have limited cognitive capacity. Our brain cannot possibly attend to all of the information that exists in our environment. Selective attention means that you're choosing information to attend to and ignoring the other information. So again, there's the focus, what is it you want to pay attention to, and the inhibition, or ignoring the other information. As you can imagine, selective attention, or the lack thereof, is associated with distractibility. A lot of individuals will argue that selective attention is under voluntary control, particularly in neurotypical individuals, that we essentially are choosing what it is that we want to pay attention to. We know this can vary a little bit more in neurodiverse folks. So if we think about ADHD or any other thing that is going to mess with our attention, it's a little bit harder, but in theory, we should be able to control what we choose to attend to. So a lot of this research dates back to studies that described a cocktail party. I'm not even sure we use the term cocktail party anymore. Essentially, we can think of any party. This is just the language that's been used when talking about it before. So think about a cocktail party, all of the noises around you. How are you able to have a conversation with your friend among all of that noise? Essentially, what is it that you need to do to attend to one person in the middle of a party? Previous research thinking about this initially starts with selective hearing by looking at dichotic listening. Dichotic listening is when someone is presented with two competing sounds at one time and attends to just one of those. Shadow tasks is a way to look at this. So a shadow task is when someone hears different information in one ear and from information heard in another ear. So let's say you have information, someone's telling you a story in your left ear about the history of the Olympics, and you're getting a different story being told to you in your right ear about Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. You are asked to repeat back the story that you heard in your left ear. So what we want to know is, were you able to attend selectively to the history of the Olympics and ignore the information about Taylor Swift? And we would test this by your ability to repeat back what you heard coming in through your left ear. A psychologist named Broadbent in 1958 came up with a filter model that is based on these dichotic listening tasks and shadow tasks. So what he found is that when doing a dichotic listening task, people typically select information on physical information. So we attend to something based on some aspect of its physical characteristics. So if it's a dichotic listening task, it might be the pitch of voice or the loudness of the voice. If it were visual, it could be the color that we're looking at. And his argument is that these physical characteristics are something that we notice early in the process. So if we're thinking about a dichotic listening task, pitch, for instance, the pitch of a voice, doesn't give you any information about the content or doesn't give you a ton of information about the content. It's just a physical characteristic. So he argues that this is early processing and that people actually aren't processing information beyond the physical characteristics, at least initially. And he came up with this model. This particular image is pulled from a textbook. So this isn't Broadbent's model. This isn't a visual of Broadbent's model, but it just describes it. So it's his model of selective attention. You're getting input, let's say, in the left ear and the right ear. You then, at another stage, filter out information from the right ear. So essentially what we've got here is this black bar, which is saying the information in the right ear stops. I'm not attending to it anymore. I have no more knowledge of it. And information from the left ear is the only thing that's going through the process. So it does not get filtered out, and we get perceptual and or meaning analysis happening as we go further in the process. This information then comes into short-term memory and our conscious awareness, and then we can potentially further process it for any other additional meaning that we need, and we can make a response with that information. The key piece here is that you are getting two sources of input, but one of them has a hard stop before you get to any level of meaning. However, where this falls apart a little bit is, have you ever been in a conversation with someone and heard your name being called? You would still hear your name. So let's go back to our cocktail party scenario. You're at a party with friends and you're talking one-on-one with a friend, ignoring the music, the noise, whatever else you're hearing. And then you hear your name being called and you turn to look. Broadbent's theory falls apart a little bit here because in theory, if we are only attending to physical characteristics and you've tuned everything out, you shouldn't have paid attention to the content that is your name. So in 1960, Treisman came up with a model, and what she did is she had people do the shadow task, but she added a little twist to it. So what she did, if we go back to our scenario, you've got the story about the Olympics coming in through your left ear and information about Taylor Swift coming in through your right ear. You're supposed to attend to the information in your left ear. She then has the stories switch ears. So now you're hearing about the Olympics in your right ear and Taylor Swift in your left ear. Your task was to attend to left ear information. However, what she finds is that most people tend to follow the story despite the fact that it's switched ears. So what we know is that it's really not just the sound that's happening. We're actually paying attention to the content. So what she's arguing is that at some level, unattended information is paid attention to, or at least monitored at some level. This idea is that information is not blocked completely, as we saw in Broadbent's model, but attenuated. So this is a very similar figure. You're getting input from the left ear and the right ear. And rather than having this hard black bar, we get sort of a gray graded bar, meaning that the information is coming through, but it's not at its highest level. And there is some meaning analysis happening so that if there was content that was relevant or important to us, we could pay attention and then respond. Another key aspect in thinking about attention is top-down and bottom-up processes. So selective attention can be affected by top-down influences. Top-down influences are processes that are guided by higher-level cognitive components. For instance, goals, expectations, previous knowledge, all of those sources of information are top-down. And this can affect what we choose to pay attention to. So let's say that you know when you are in class that you have a professor who talks really, really fast, and it's hard to read the slides and take notes at the same time. However, what you've learned is that the professor is often giving stories that aren't even relevant to what you need to know. You're choosing to tune out the professor because historically you know that that information is not important and you really want to pay attention to what's on the slide. That would be a top-down process, choosing what to pay attention to because you have previous knowledge of this professor. You might have specific goals for yourselves in learning the material, and therefore you're choosing to attend to one thing versus another. At the same time, selective attention can be affected by bottom-up influences. So a bottom-up influence refers to that initial sensory process without the influence of higher order cognition. So one thing that might come into play here is the salience of stimuli. So in this instance, we might, I think the best example here is, let's say you're with a child and your child, or mothers with a child, or fathers with a child, parents with a child, and they're in a daycare setting and there's lots of noise and they're talking to somebody, lots of babies maybe making sounds and noises and yelling and crying, but then they hear their own child cry. That is a very salient stimuli and a very salient sound. And so they're going to attend to that cry, but probably tune out the other pieces. This is not a top-down process. This is salience of stimuli and comes from a bottom-up process. Novelty might also be bottom-up. So something really loud or unusual or different might draw our attention because it's novel to what we might have been experiencing in the moment. This would also be a bottom-up process. So we have a couple different measures of selective attention. One is the Stroop word and color task. So you may have seen this in other talks or may be familiar with this, but the Stroop word and color task is often given in two pieces. So here's an example. The goal of this task is that you say the color that you see versus reading the word. Sometimes this is really easy because the color and the word are the same. So for instance, here, the color that we see is blue and the word is also blue. This is true here where the color is yellow and the word is yellow. This becomes harder when the two are mismatched. So the word written out is yellow, but the color that we see is red. Similarly, the word written out here is red, but the color that we see is green. In this task, usually what happens, the first sheet of paper you're given is all same matched stimuli. So for instance, this blue, this yellow, this green, and this red, you'd get a whole sheet of these and you would read them as quickly as you could and you'd be timed. You would then be given another sheet and you would have all of the mismatched words. So this red written in yellow, or the word yellow written in the color red, this word red written in the color green, your task would be to say red, green, yellow, blue, and name the color that you see rather than the word. That's hard because you've got competing information. So essentially what we're doing is we are attending to the color that we see and ignoring the written word that we might be likely to read. And then you're timed for that. And you can get a sense of selective attention by subtracting out those two scores. Where this one gets a little bit tricky is that some people see it more as a measure of behavioral inhibition, which it is in the sense that you are inhibiting the impulse to just read the word that you see. It is selective attention, but it has other processes happening as well. Another example is the flanker task, and I hope I'm going to show you that here. So the flanker task is essentially where, this one is for children. I think it's more fun to look at it when it's for children. For adults, you see arrows, and essentially you see all these arrows pointing in the same direction or opposite directions, and your task is to identify what direction the middle arrow is going. In the flanker task that I'm going to show you on the screen, it's done with fish. It's meant for children, and so essentially you're paying attention to that middle fish. There's 5 fish, so pay attention to the one in the middle and indicate which direction that fish is pointing. So if you're at a computer with a keyboard while you're watching this, you can see your arrows and you would have your fingers on the arrows, one pointing to the left, one pointing to the right, and you would click in which direction the fish is pointing. But what you saw was the fish were pointing in different directions, and eventually the fish would switch directions, and you're inhibiting the information about the other fish on either side. Another one is the attentional blink task. So what I'm going to show you is the attentional blink task here. So your eyes blink during data processing and also during a visual surprise. This is called the attentional blink. Your brain has resources for paying attention. Each time it focuses on something new, a gap occurs. So in a few moments, a stream of letters will appear on the screen. Your target is the letter R, which will be followed rapidly by the letter C. So you want to pay attention to R as well as track C. But essentially what we're asking you to do first is make sure you identify R and then also try to identify C. It is really hard to identify both. And if you were consciously trying to attend for R, you probably only saw R, even though both R and C were in the list of letters. Essentially, it is really, really hard to grasp both. So this is a nice measure of selective attention as well to see how many things you can actually identify and look for in these tasks. This is a classic task that is used a lot when we think about selective attention. You may have seen it in social psychology. I'm going to show this to you really quickly as well.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half miss the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it, but did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
So what we've done is asked you to select attention to the players in white passing the basketball. And most people really strongly attend to that, very eager to get it right. And what you miss is that about halfway through this task, we see something that is completely unexpected and novel, which is this gorilla right here in the middle of the screen. The other thing, if you are familiar with the task, is during that time, the curtain also changed colors. If you were looking for the players passing the ball as well as the gorilla, you probably missed the fact that
The monkey business illusion.
you probably missed the fact that the curtain changed colors as well, even though that's a fairly novel thing to have happen too. So that's kind of a fun selective attention thing. There are several like silly activities that you can well, not activities, silly things that you can do where you can really change out who someone is talking to if there's a slight disruption. We don't tend to notice a bunch of things. We're selectively paying attention to what we see or as relevant or important in the situation and may miss other features. Selective attention, again, is really, really important because
The monkey business illusion.
selective attention, again, is really important because it is not possible for us to attend to everything in our environment. So we need this skill to make sure we're getting information that we really need. We also need to be aware that we have a bias to attend to some things and not other things.